Mass Effect has had the reputation of being one of the grandest franchises in video games, and I've always sat on the sidelines during conversations surrounding it. My experience with Mass Effect was a couple of attempts at playing the first one, a run-through of the second game's demo, and a confusing weekend of getting the wrong game from the rental store but trying to make the most of a bad situation. The only other thought involving Mass Effect in my young mind was knowing that the game series had a very massive controversy surrounding its conclusion, and despite my usual no-spoilers lifestyle, I was curious to know what was so horrendous. After watching the cutscenes that concluded the trilogy, even I, with almost zero connection or love for this series, felt a kick in the gut. After the dust settled, a young and cynical me truly expected Mass Effect to fade away into its embarrassing position in video game history. Perhaps the journey would be so tainted by its painful, spike-filled trap of a destination that even its grandest flag flyers would encourage new players to keep away while fully displaying their self-inflicted wounds. This rather depressing outlook of mine was most certainly fueled by many influences, but the main motivation for wanting to hear that excuse was this. Judging based on what little of the series I had played, I didn't get it. I didn't like Mass Effect. However, I would be so severely confronted throughout my life by Mass Effect fans left and right. Any location where video gamers dwelled felt like a location fused with a ticking time bomb, counting down to the moment that the Mass Effect conversation started up. Every visit to the local GameStop was a guarantee of being bombarded by hoodies and t-shirts emblazoned with the N7 logo. I had no idea what that meant, but it had come up so often in my life, I knew who that logo was supposed to be calling to, who Mr. Game & Stop wanted to entice with their significantly more profitable merchandise purchase. Every video game podcast and channel was a dangerous word minefield. A science fiction conversation could go in the direction of Halo or the predictable direction of Mass Effect. I was not safe, like coming out of a bunker after a nuclear bombing. I thought the war was over, but the radiation remained. Years out from the metaphorical Hindenburg crash that was Mass Effect 3's ending, I had been so sure the love for this series would be over, that the bubble had finally burst. It had not. Perhaps I should have recognized this for the clear message that the series and its fans were trying to send me. However, for an uncomfortably lengthy amount of time, I refused the call. Yet there is always a part of me that yearns to know, to understand. I know when something is outside of my range or just isn't for me, but the call, I could feel it just outside of where I was willing to go. Why would so many players for so many years retain their abundant praise for this series if there wasn't something to love? Why would the choices in these games ever even matter if they ultimately won't? Why should I even invest my time in this beloved series if it's just going to eventually head down the path that all good games do? As I mentioned before, I have touched each of these games, the first one being the game that I have the most playtime in. Unfortunately, that extra dose of playtime was just enough for me to form a negative opinion of the series overall. I did not like the gameplay, I despised its menus, and frankly, I was just young enough that the dialogue-heavy systems kind of bored me. Yet here we are, so many years separated from that initial experience, and let's face some facts, that game has probably not aged any better. But I have. So maybe now is my time to really do this. Creative curiosity has allowed me to be the hare I am today, and it is what furthers my love for video games. If I can witness this game series have such a profound and impactful existence in so many of my fellow video game lovers' lives, then it must be worth it all in some way. And maybe I shouldn't wait to watch the series through someone else's eyes. Perhaps I need to take the initiative, grab this bull by the horns. Surely it's time I take a step into the world and enjoy it myself. And I mean, why not? At best, I figure out why it's such a beloved series despite its flaws. At worst, I can form a solid reasoning for why I don't like Mass Effect. So, with gritted teeth and a healthy dosage of patience, let's board the Normandy together and begin the first of a lengthy 3-part journey. Welcome aboard, I'm Commander Hare, and today I'm going to comb the galaxy like my pompadour in search of the answer to the question, why do people like Mass Effect? Before we truly embark, let's get a few things out of the way. Disclaimer, this is obviously my personal opinion and based purely on my own experience. That experience includes the fact that I am playing this well beyond its release and completely excluded from the internet fandom and zeitgeist. I will likely present information as if it is new despite the osmosis of the internet considering it to be well-known information. This is both for clarity and ease of creation. Please forgive my ignorance, but we all must start somewhere, and if I am to get into this series properly, then I think ignorance is the best attribute to have going in. I don't know what I don't know, you know? Also, for the sake of clarity, we need to disclose one last thing here. To me, it was very important that I play these games in the way God intended. In order to truly understand the love surrounding this game series, I must humor EA for a moment and allow them to play that role of God. So it is with a heavy heart that I submit to their decree. The legendary version, as shipped, is my point of reference, and boy, it's legendary, alright. I don't have to know this game inside and out to know that the Legendary Edition isn't exactly the best representation of this series, but it might be closer than nothing at all. Fortunately for everyone involved, I'm generally very patient and lenient when it comes to buggy and unpolished games. Where I start to draw issues, however, is when a game is re-released in this state. So much cleanup occurred, making these games widely available. They even had time to adjust camera angles for Shepard's sake, yet here the game is, well after launch, with many incredible flaws and freakouts. My Mass Effect experience was absolutely filled to bursting with these moments, and it's definitely one of many great obstacles between me and loving these games. The first game has the majority of these quote-unquote working as intended issues, but thankfully for all of us, these are never the moments that stand out to me, so I probably won't mention them beyond this moment. Just wanted to take this time to specify which version I was rolling with and make it abundantly clear that I personally prefer playing games modless, even if that guarantees a worse experience overall. I just like to at least attempt to see games in the manner in which they were released, and felt it was vital in getting a full grasp on my opinion on the series overall. With all of that preamble out of the way, let's begin. The first in the series, the game that caught the love and attention of the masses, and started the undeniable craze to follow. As far as my life was concerned, Mass Effect was an advertisement halfway through my only Hulk comic that, on a 2-page spread, attempted to intrigue me with a sense of open-ended galaxy exploration. Thus, I was never interested in the game. Controversial, possibly, but I'm not one for open worlds and exploration. I think they can be a lot of fun when really well done, but a lot of times, freedom comes at the sacrifice of story in gaming, and story is the real selling point for me. So it wasn't until far later in life, when I learned that Mass Effect actually prided itself on its story more than its gameplay, that I started to peek my head in the door. I rented the game from the local Family Video and sat down for my first attempt. I can almost exactly place where I was and just how far I made it into the game before I put the controller down and decided to play something else. I'm really not sure what it is about this first one, but I bounce off of it hard and often. It took so many attempts to finally force myself into giving the game a fair shake, but when I finally did, I immediately understood why it had been so difficult for me. Mass Effect begins in a way that gives itself a lot of open ends to intrigue the player, telling us the relevant information about our main character, Commander Shepard, while leaving them open to interpretation based on our upcoming choices and actions. Off the bat, I instantly love this idea. Having our character be forced with a consistent last name allows the game to really get more personal with the player character, while also giving a fair amount of freedom with our role-playing possibilities, but not too many. The game manages to keep its narrative focus without overstepping itself, at least for now. I want to really commend this notion of being a light role-playing narrative. I find that too often games attempt to label themselves as role-playing games that then force your characters into positions they would not be in, doing things they would not do, and giving you so little options in terms of proper customization. What this inevitably leads to is an issue that I find all too common. You must instead create a character based on the limitations of the game, rather than the game giving you the tools to play however you see fit. In Mass Effect, the pure ground-up character builder that you may have in your mind is already ripped out of your hands. And while this would be relatively easy to label as a complaint or weak point, Mass Effect effectively communicates its limits before the first choice is even made. You may have expected me to jump into this game and rag on its mostly binary choice systems, but at least for now, that's not really an issue. Instead, Mass Effect does a really clever job at communicating your level of control from the simple options in the character creator, sending you on your way with just the right amount of expectations. The game also does itself plenty of favors by doing my favorite thing in all of storytelling, jumping into a story far into the middle of something, but just before the relevant conflict. Characters are tossing words around and introducing themselves aggressively. I have no idea what's happening, and I love it. It's not too long on the ship before we're introduced to our ground zero of the series, Eden Prime, and some characters that will be main players throughout the series, Caden and Jenkins. I meant Caden and Ashley. I'll get into the characters in a moment, but these two are so very vital to the lifeblood of the series and serve extremely well as starting cast members, but my god, do they completely lose my interest almost as soon as we're introduced to literally anyone else. One thing very interesting about this game series has been, and always will be, its deep lore. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I know anything about anything, but listening to characters go on at length about the ongoings that are involved in this universe has me gripped every time. And that's good, because everyone talks a lot. This is a major strength of the game, but I imagine that if you weren't interested in it, it's got to be a death sentence. And I can nearly guarantee that this was the case for my younger self. Back then, I was far less interested in world building or character depth. I just wanted to see cool space stuff. This series definitely has that, but I think its writing will always be its strongest suit. Despite this strength, I think I have always had a few complications with pacing here and there when it comes to this first entry. The plot setup and motivation is fair enough. Our big bad antagonist, Saren, is presented in a way where he is equally mysterious and dastardly, with most of the heavy lifting coming from Anderson's tales of Saren's villainy. However, where I do take pause is just how absurdly quick our dominoes fall in line. The plot is shockingly simple, though you may not realize it after countless conversations that retread the same ground over and over, being interspersed with conversation of equal length, introducing new concepts that may take a second to understand. Mass Effect's writing overall is overflowing with talent, but its moment-to-moment story building is often so stop and start that it can get a little confusing for newcomers to the series. I will briefly summarize what this first game is about. Shepard arrives on a planet with a Spectre named Nihilus. Spectres are the galactic super cops of this story. The Council, a governing body of aliens, have sent Nihilus to investigate if Commander Shepard is potentially ready to be enlisted as one of those super cops. This would be killer news if Shepard manages to impress, as humanity is relatively new to the whole space game, and getting some representation on the Spectre team might really give humanity some potential sway in the future. This simple mission on the human colony of Eden Prime, however, goes haywire very quickly.
We are under attack, taking heavy casualties. I repeat, heavy casualties. We can't. Get evac. They came out of nowhere. We need.
A ship of unknown origin arrives and slaughters the entire colony, leaving behind horrid machines that are capable of transforming humans into zombified machine husks. Aiding in this massacre are the Geth. The Geth are a robotic race that gained sentience and kicked their creators off of their home planet. However, one has never been sighted this far away from home before. This new threat will serve as the antagonist for nearly the entirety of the game. I feel like there should be some sort of obligation for me to complain about the severe lack of variety this causes, or how it paints a relatively lazy picture of the enemies we will soon be facing, but honestly, I don't know if I really have that sort of complaint in me. In the entirety of my playthrough, I never found the Geth uninteresting or disengaging. I think they work for now. Anyways, after the shock of the Geth reveal and witnessing the massive ship's departure, Nihilus is confronted by a fellow Spectre, Saren. Saren, clearly connected to everything that's happening here, takes advantage of his relationship with his cop buddy and blindsides him. Saren is here on Eden Prime for a Prothean artifact. Protheans are the powerful and wise race that used to inhabit this galaxy before they suddenly vanished. This artifact is not just proof of their existence, it has another use. Saren gets a hold of the artifact, uses it, and leaves, setting charges to blow up the artifact in the surrounding area. Our heroes stop the detonation, but when Shepard's team approaches the artifact, Shepard finds out exactly what it's capable of, transmitting images from the Protheans. A message, or perhaps a warning, it remains unclear. Regardless, the artifact destroys itself, and now Shepard is not only carrying this Prothean data, but also the last hope of reporting Saren to the Council, bringing him to justice and uncovering the answers to our remaining questions. After landing on the Citadel and reporting Saren as sus, we end up having a full party of Saren-hating pals within what feels like moments. And where originally the Citadel Council was so quick to dismiss our claims of Saren's villainy, they are equally as quick to change their mind, with the only piece of evidence being a recording of him saying some dirty swear words.
You wanted proof? There it is.
On the one hand, I get it. We gotta get the ball rolling so Shepard can become a Spectre and the true game can get a move on. Without the Council's promotion, we lose the versatile capabilities of diplomatic immunity and all the different super cop stories that come with it. So getting the player to that point quickly is fine, makes sense. It's more in the introduction and befriending of each character that always jars me as quick and lacking. Though what it's lacking, I'm not sure. Perhaps it's a symptom of playing this game late. Years after the dust of discussion has settled, I know the adoration for Garrus Vakarian. I've seen the intimate discussions of Tali's best girl status. I could tell Rex would be my favorite the moment I met him. So for their introduction to be lacking the intimacy that the series later develops was, in one word, disappointing. However, the characters are so well developed, their storylines and personalities so fleshed out, that I almost considered not mentioning this part entirely. By the end of the series, it is in these characters and the many more to join that the series truly holds its own. Without them, Mass Effect would not be remembered as the juggernaut of writing that it is today. To ignore the characters and our relationship to them, both as a player and as Shepard, would be to disregard what makes this series even worth looking at. In Mass Effect, gameplay consists almost entirely of shooting some enemies and then having conversations. To be clear, the shoot-bang parts of Mass Effect 1 are its dullest part, which is ironic considering its nature as the only parts of the game that inject any sort of moment-to-moment action found most common in a video game world. Instead, it is within conversation with those who surround Shepard that we find the majority of this game's more interesting depth. On one topic of conversation, there is the depth of choice, a much more literal representation of player choice in this case. In a game like Dishonored, player choice is presented in the form of active gameplay. Whether or not you kill your target and any guards that get in your way along that path is what dictates the state of the world, how each level will play out differently from each other, and what the ending of your game will look like. In Mass Effect, we trade all of that for the dialogue choice systems, heavier in its impact to the story, but lacking in so many other ways. Mass Effect borrows this concept from many games before it. However, the most important one to observe is BioWare's previous title, Star Wars: Knights of the Old Republic. I'm trying to keep this section on the shorter side, and introducing the topic of KOTOR into an already lengthy discussion of Mass Effect is a potentially foolish move. However, to not mention it feels like a mishandling of any analysis of this game. Because make no mistake, Mass Effect is just KOTOR with a lot less steps. While Knights of the Old Republic has a significantly different style of active gameplay, its choice and dialogue options remain so similar to what would eventually become Mass Effect's well-known and often replicated dialogue wheel. In KOTOR, your options during conversation were not voice acted, but instead, every option was presented in its entirety. Mass Effect foregoes this overbearing display of words by simplifying every option into a few words and having the voice actors for Shepard give the lengthy version themselves. This approach to simplifying a lot of KOTOR systems is, in my opinion, what made Mass Effect so universally approachable by its massive audience. Because it doesn't stop there. In KOTOR, combat is represented in a somewhat turn-based RPG-like system, while Mass Effect jumped straight onto the freshly blossoming third-person cover shooter genre, instantly increasing its appeal to the average player. KOTOR also is well known for its choices. Depending on your approach to every situation and character, your player character would in turn align with more of a Jedi or Sith lifestyle. This affected their appearance, their powers, and how they would be treated by certain characters. In Mass Effect, we take that system, far reduce its effects on gameplay, and in exchange, focus on its effects on the universe itself, as well as the nuances of the plot. With the wise move to basically normalize a game they had already made, and instead focus on its most interesting parts, placing it in a universe of their own creation, BioWare set themselves up phenomenally for the success that the franchise would quickly find. But how do I actually feel about this dialogue system, and the characters that we get to know through it? We'll start with a very quick look at the crew members of this first entry. I'll start at the bottom of my personal ranking, however, and work my way up. Kaidan Alenko is one of the most basic cookie-cutter characters. In every BioWare game, there has to be a Kaidan, and in every game, he's just as nothing to me. Kaidan was deleted from my group as soon as there were 2 aliens on the team, and despite the fact he's at the bottom of my tier list, it's only because he's so nothing that I wouldn't remember if he exists if the game would allow me. No, the actual character I despise the most at least makes me feel something, and she's up next. Ashley Williams has a special place in my soul, and by that, I mean she's the worst.
And here's the problem.
I can't tell the aliens from the animals.
She's a racist.
Excuse me, bitch?
She's a space racist, a spacist, if you will. And honestly, it's actually a really good idea to have this type of character on your team. Reason being that the world of Mass Effect is stupid complicated when it comes to relations between species. That relationship between humans and others is one that has plenty of layers. And since we, as players, are actual human beings, we're going to relate to them and their plights the most. So adding someone close to us that could help us comprehend this complex situation would be really beneficial to the game and its world building. But instead, we got Ashley. Instead of adding any value to the team, she feels like a constant anchor. She spouts out lines like a racist grandpa who quote-unquote has no filter. She interrupts conversations to get a baseless jab in, and when she isn't being a racist, she's just generally annoying to me. She was the only member of the team that I would have chucked out an airlock given the chance, which is funny because I essentially did. I leapt at the chance to send her to go and blow herself up, and certainly did not regret it in the slightest. Now, who knows? Maybe in the future Ashley gains a lot of insight into her character, adding layers of depth that would make her feel more human, and maybe they even roll back the spacism. Ashley learns that while working with a crew full of space dwellers that maybe they're more human than even the humans are. But I'll never know because I nuked her ass with a smile and never looked back. Good riddance. Next on the chopping block is Liara T'Soni. Liara is a calm, calculated science girl who's hitting the space road to research the advanced race that came before us, the Protheans. Her somewhat naive attitude and curious nature makes her a really nice and engaging character overall, never really sharing any sort of negative moment with her. Even at her most negative, she's the most reasonable and understanding character in the whole series. She is so low on this list, however, because I find her unassuming self to be a little on the bland side, though I concede that I think that's to the series' benefit. As the franchise goes on, Liara actually grows and hardens based on the world around her, and it's really awesome to watch that happen slowly, though for now, in this game, it's a little boring. Garrus Vakarian. It isn't surprising that Garrus is one of the most beloved characters in the whole franchise. He's got so many good qualities that everyone would want in a companion, legitimately. There are so many good things to mention about Garrus that I don't want to even try and name them all, as I'm sure I'll miss one of the traits he carries that makes him someone's favorite. What has always stood out to me with Garrus, however, is just how perfect of a wingman he is for Shepard. He's loyal, he's charismatic, he's unafraid to question both authority and injustice, and best of all, he's set up as the perfect full-body representation of this game. Garrus has a get-it-done attitude. He believes in doing the right thing, even if that means you gotta bend and break the rules. This is pretty much the first thing he says to us, and his hatred for Saren always being able to slip by without consequences makes him easily one of the most believable additions to your crew. Garrus's neutral good status serves perfectly for Shepard's potential choices. No matter how much of a dirtbag you are, even if Garrus disagrees, he still trusts that you're doing what needs to be done. While I disagree philosophically, it usually makes sense. Garrus remains one of the most grounded characters in the story, and that's not even getting into why I really think he's the best companion for Shepard specifically. In the world of Mass Effect, humans and Turians have some major heat. When the two species initially bumped shoulders, it led to a war. Though the Council got involved and shut it down, the two races still look at each other sideways. Garrus, as a Turian companion, should represent this tension, but he almost never does. Garrus provides this hopeful outlook of the galaxy just by merely being your friend. There is no grudge that can't be forgotten. There is no pain worth holding on to. In the eyes of a much greater threat, these are meaningless. Garrus knows that. I know that. And without ever directly addressing it, we move on from any petty squabble. Our mind remains focused on our mission, and the relationship between Shepard and Garrus remains that much stronger for it. In this way, Garrus is, to me, representative of the franchise in its entirety. And in a way, Garrus is more human than most of our human companions. But despite being so perfect, he's still not my personal favorite crew member. For all of the ways that I find Liara milquetoast, there is another character with almost the same foundation who I personally like so much more. Tali Zora Naraya. I know the waifu wars may have their flames stoked once more with this one, but hear me out. I promise I'll be reasonable about it. Because in this initial game, Tali actually doesn't get too much play. In many ways, Tali might be one of the least special members of the crew when we look at her through the lens of the first installment. Her introduction is that she has incriminating evidence on Saren, which turns out to only be a recording of the villain, surely not the most solid thing in the world of VIs and AIs. And overall, her purpose on the Normandy is to serve as a relatable exposition fountain for the Quarians. Where I find her story more dynamic, however, is in how she starts as a character who is naive, hopeful, and trusting, her mind solidly set on the uplifting of her people. Over the course of the series, however, she begins to grow into her own, being a lot less trusting, with her hand on her holster, yet still keeping that optimistic attachment to her ambitions. In this way, she, just like Garrus, feels so human, in the sense that she's relatable. She's overall a well-written, bright-eyed teenager turned hardened adult with an arc and personality that keeps her grounded and believable. But in terms of this first game, sheesh, is she boring. But I like her voice and she has interesting things to say. I like listening to her, so she's high up on my list. But she's not the top because there's someone else I love listening to even more.
Witnesses saw you making threats in Fist's bar. Stay away from him.
I don't take orders from you.
This is your only warning, Rex.
You should warn Fist. I will kill him.
You want me to arrest you?
I want you to try.
Rex. Oh, how I love thee. To me, Rex is easily the type of character that checks all the boxes of an iconic favorite. He's dependable, but true to himself. He doesn't blindly follow. He tags along out of interest and profit. Rex's introduction is weak, in all honesty. He's given very little in terms of motivation, and despite his reasons for joining Shepard in his quest for justice being presented, they aren't very strong reasons. He almost seems to be tossing himself into the fire without even being sure of why or who he's jumping in with, despite this rather sloppy first impression. It's what Rex brings to the table throughout the series that I adore. Rex is Krogan, a warrior species that pride themselves on power and masochistic tendencies. The Krogan are, potentially, the most powerful beings in the galaxy. They were initially a race that nuked themselves back into the Stone Age, and would have struggled and clawed their way back to their former glory over the course of many centuries. However, the Solarians, a race of short-lived, quick-talking science lovers, conscripted the Krogan to fight a galaxy-threatening enemy known as the Rachni. Giving them the tools and weapons necessary to defeat this new enemy, the Solarians and Turians sat back as the Krogan threw themselves full force at this savage threat. However, once the Rachni were killed to extinction, this savagery took on a new form. The Krogan rebelled, crushing the galaxy planet by planet with relative ease. The Solarian scientists needed a solution to this problem, a way to stop the Krogan without weapons or might, and what they concocted was far more horrific than any gun. All of this information pours from the lips of Rex. Learning about the genophage and all of its political background is already enough to present a player with the most interesting philosophical quandary this series has to offer, and boy, is it a good one. However, what I adore about Rex is the step he takes just beyond that. He isn't just a representation of a warrior race. He dares to have the added layer of being a representation of the post-warrior race. Rex is tired, another box checked. He's spent his long life meandering through the galaxy and away from his home world. His people are not dissimilar. They are isolated, strangers to one another. In a world post-genophage, the Krogan race is on the brink of its final breaths. There is no hope for a next generation. The genophage that the Turians and Solarians spread across the Krogan home planet has ensured that the chances of an infant's survival are slim to none. Without proper focus and a shroud of hopelessness, the remaining Krogans, with all of their pride and stubbornness, are finding themselves spread across the galaxy, filled with a sense of fatalism. Most are hired as mercenaries, some are running with gangs, and this one is joining an incredibly dangerous mission, up against incalculable odds fighting an enemy he barely has beef with. What Rex brings to the table, to me, goes beyond his charming personality and rugged approach. Rex presents himself as a fully fleshed out character that I can completely understand. Just a guy looking for some last semblance of purpose and hope, not just for him, but for his people. So, when Rex inevitably hears that Saren has successfully produced an army of Krogan cured of the genophage, he pulls a gun on us for even suggesting that we destroy it all, and there isn't an ounce of me that doesn't get it. Put Shepard in that position, and they might do the same thing. Seriously, I love Rex. Undoubtedly, one of Mass Effect's greatest strength lies within these stories. Every major character has the potential for me to do an entire deep dive into their background and their philosophy. Yes, even the ones I brushed off. The level of writing behind each of them is one of the pillars that this series stands on, and without question, it is what makes this first game even remotely palatable. There is truly not enough time to run down all of the key players and individuals that we will meet in this game. Even less time to go over those those that will be recurring players throughout the series. Each of them feels memorable and special by the end of the series. However, in this first game, it can begin to feel exhausting with just how many people you meet and their importance or lack thereof to the story, though there's plenty of room for argument that this is intentional. The universe is large, dense, and your job as a Spectre is not an easy one. Yet, no matter who you meet or how you feel about them, your crew always remains as one of the most consistent and strongest written parts of every single game, which is how it should be. They're your family that you return home to after every event. They're the ones who join you on your adventures, each equipped with their own unique remarks and extra dialogue based on the situation at hand. They are a constant in a galaxy of variables, and there's something overwhelmingly comforting about that. Without them, this series would not be the same whatsoever, because heaven knows Mass Effect isn't still discussed today because of its gameplay. Take everything that I have nice to say about this first installment's narrative capabilities and toss them out the airlock the moment that the game asks me to interact with it outside of the comforting simplicity of its dialogue trees. In both versions of the game I played, both versions of myself found this game to be incredibly obtuse in so many ways. As a child, I found the gunplay to be very sluggish and presented with a rather boring lack of bombast. As a much more patient adult, I find the gunplay to be very sluggish and presented with a rather frustrating degree of obtusity. In my initial playthrough as a child, I remember being into games with more snappy controls, and while I hadn't stepped foot into the territory of the legendary cover shooter Gears of War just yet, I still knew that something about this game overall did not initially click with me. I found myself dying repeatedly in the same areas and overall hating the way every gun felt. Now, as a veteran fan of cover shooters, I can confirm that my younger self wasn't just some kind of idiot. While death has become way less frequent and parts that were once difficult are now being completed with barely a blink, I still cannot get over how much I don't like almost everything about this game in terms of gameplay. A lot of times I would glaze over this portion when talking about a video game. I would explain all of my frustrations in a few sentences, and then we'd all ride off into the sunset as I transitioned into talking about the emotional and narrative high points. However, I truly do mean it when I say I bounced off this game several times and nearly didn't clear this first hurdle of entry into the series. When the game isn't frustratingly obtuse, fighting me at every junction, it's just boring, nearly putting me to sleep in my chair, and I mean that very literally. Cover shooting was not a particularly new thing in the world of video games. When looking at it with an idiotic cynicism, Gears of War perfected it a year prior to Mass Effect's release. Potentially, one would take this as grounds to claim that Mass Effect had little excuse for being as weak of a cover shooter as it is. I, however, know that video games are not built in a year. On top of that, BioWare's previous game looked like this, and just before that was this. It's honestly kind of incredible that the same studio somehow created this. That being said, as many niceties and excuses as I can easily provide to justify this game's lack of polish, it doesn't change the overall impact of the experience. Hopping from cover to cover is janky, difficult, and most times kinda useless. However, not being in cover is usually a death sentence. From cover, you can peek out and shoot. Your weapons all have infinite ammo in this game, with a simple overheat mechanic. While I may catch some flack for it, the overheating might be one of the strongest reasons for my description of gameplay being sluggish. The snappy responsiveness of your average cover shooter is missing, and in its place is this sound effect, while you wait for your gun to cool down. In the downtime and in between shots, there's another layer to interact with combat. This game has abilities equipped to yourself and your team that you can summon at will, with a fun little wheel that allows you to stop time and properly aim. This mechanic is an incredible extension to the tools found in previous titles, and presents an added layer to the moment-to-moment action. In subsequent games, I will learn to love this mechanic. However, in this game, I rarely got to take full advantage of it due to my class. I really won't get into the class systems and how unenjoyable I find them, but just know that in this first game, they are far more aggressive than they will be in future installments. For future reference, just know that if a game presents me with the glory of stealth, I will always take that route first. So, as an infiltrator, I was very limited in what I could and couldn't do. Multiple playthroughs could easily remedy this lack of interaction with the game's mechanics, but trust me, I have toyed with it enough to know that I just don't care for it. I'd argue that in this first game, I care so little for this menu in its entirety. In fact, that's consistent with this game from start to finish. Menus are abundant in this Western RPG light cover shooter, and naturally, we've got to fill those menus with menus. Aside from some complaints about its fairly ugly user interface, my issue with these menus is just how often I feel like I am opening them, deleting stuff, switching stuff, and returning to gameplay, only to find that my experience has ultimately not been all that changed or enhanced. You can equip armor and they allegedly make you stronger. You can add mods to your weapons that give you small percentage changes. You can give yourself small incremental buffs in your abilities menu on the way to new abilities that might shake up gameplay if you're willing to spend the points to get there. Make sure you don't spend those points in useless slots though. Skill points should be used wisely. Luckily, there's an auto-assign skill points button, but oh wait, the internet told me that that's bad. Don't press it. I think if you know me, you already knew where I was going, and if you don't know me, you probably still know where I'm going with this. I hate it. All of it. I wouldn't even say this is something that quote-unquote isn't for me or doesn't appeal to me. This is a whole bunch of systems that outside of the abilities menu, specifically when I unlock an ability, feels kind of useless. My stance on a lot of these menus is mainly this. If you took most of this stuff completely out of the game, would I like the game more? Does it lose value when you rip these systems out of the full package? I'm sure we won't all arrive at the same conclusion, but when it comes to me and my Mass Effect experience, I would love nothing more than to be able to completely ignore all of this stuff. Because no part of this menu was fun, no part of it was engaging and mentally stimulating. Every moment spent in its web was another moment where I wish I was doing something else. Maybe doing the parts where these menus can't touch me. Like, what about walking? Walking from one area to another isn't affected by these menus, and yet somehow I feel the need to complain about it too. Walking is bouncy but slow. Every visit to the Citadel is several hours worth of footage of what looks like aimless wandering, but I assure you, this is the sight of a shepherd on a mission. Every planet feels mostly the same. Every walk animation has this flighty frustration to it, and every character that encourages me to walk to the other side of the map is just asking for me to take the casually easier, evil option where I don't help them. To make up for this walking, maybe we can hop into a nice vehicle. In video games, especially of the sci-fi nature, vehicles are an extra spice that really helps enhance the options for one's maneuverability. They allow for a faster traversal in situations where a vehicle is suited, or even if they aren't necessarily quicker, it does still add a variety to the simplicity of walking. In Mass Effect, we have the Mako. The Mako is equipped with handling all terrain. How it handles that terrain, however, is with a display of slippery chaos. I personally really like the Mako, and I actually like how it controls, but it doesn't make it any less frustrating at certain points in your exploration. It also doesn't ease the pain that, for the most part, your access to the Mako will be limited to locations that are barren and uninteresting, planet after planet of nothing, meaning that once again another system is relegated to being almost so useless that I don't think I would miss its absence, or at the very least, its reduction of use. Our last bastion of hope is the minigames, and I mean, do I even need to mention those? Outside of Quasar, a far less engaging version of Blackjack, this game's minigames aren't exactly the spice of life I was looking for. The game uses a simple game of Simon Says or Frogger-like game system, depending on your chosen platform, as its hacking, lock-picking mechanic, and while it's far from the worst minigame representation of this concept, it gets so incredibly uninteresting by the end of the game. The only one to shake the whole thing up is a Towers of Hanoi game that just, well, thank the goddess it's only in this series once. Hopefully you can see what I mean when I say that overall this gameplay just collapses in on itself by the end of the game. I'm so thoroughly unengaged for the vast majority of it due to one system falling back on another system which leads into another system, each one more disappointing than the last. As I have stated repeatedly, this game is held up by one thing, and that is its narrative. And thankfully, our last stop on this tour of gameplay is our relationship to the game's narrative twists and turns. turns. When you aren't hopping around, driving carelessly, or shooting Geth, the majority of your time is spent engaged in conversation with the multitude of inhabitants that occupy this wide galaxy. These conversations don't just make up the bulk of our exposition delivery, but also act as our main means of interaction. Nearly every conversation is made up of a few unspoken and consistently broken rules. On the right side are your main means of engaging in conversation. Selecting these typically progresses the conversation and can potentially lock in decisions. Choosing these is usually the last thing you want to do. Not as in you don't want to do them, but I mean as in you only want to choose these once you are ready to move on. On the left side of the dialogue wheel are elaborations. When talking to just about anyone, they will almost certainly mention a concept that is new to you as a player. These extra chat options allow for you, the player, to discover more about this game's universe and get to know the characters a little more intimately. Unless, of course, the options you can select are highlighted in blue or red. These options are your main game changers. Paragon, highlighted in blue, are your pure good guy options. Renegade is signified in red. A renegade specter is someone who gets things done, albeit in a typically rude or hostile manner. In each game, the severity of just how borderline evil these renegade options are changes. In some, you are straight up unnecessarily cruel. In others, you are just a little rugged and hard-boiled. Regardless, it's typically through these two colored options that we truly gain the ability to shake up the game and its universe in major ways. In many ways, I could see how these conversation options could be universally criticized for ultimately being so basic. And in fairness, it's not really anything all that revolutionary in the world of video games. Not back in 2007, and certainly not now. But truthfully, Mass Effect and games similar to it are not actually about the choices we make. The often overlooked reality is that what keeps this system engaging is what the game is truly about: consequences. This is perhaps what keeps Mass Effect afloat throughout its entirety, and what will eventually unfold to be both this series' greatest strength as well as its most egregious detriment. Choices are simple. If I gave you an infinite pool of choices, you'd be able to fly through it and likely wouldn't give plenty of questions, no matter their ethical controversy, too much thought. Making choices completely devoid of purpose and consequences is easy. Mass Effect many times excels by attempting to rip away that ease and instead cause you to ponder on many an ethical conundrum. In Mass Effect, there are choices presented that can save lives, end lives, change lives, grow bonds, break bonds, and by the end of the game, Shepard's effect on the shape of this galaxy and its people is already monumental. Take, for example, the Rachni. Earlier, I mentioned that the Krogan had wiped them out to extinction. However, that's not necessarily the case. On the planet Noveria, some science chumps managed to find a rogue Rachni egg. They hatched it, only to find a Rachni queen. With greed for potential mad scientist profit, they ripped the queen's eggs away from her, hoping to raise these dangerous creatures into fully controllable soldier drones. This obviously didn't go well. The Rachni are a hive mind without the queen to soothe and influence them. The younglings are intensely savage monsters. The choice that's presented to us after tearing through many of these monsters is this. The Rachni queen speaks to us through telepathic puppetry and pleads for a second chance for the Rachni people. The new queen has no goals for conquest or vengeance. She wishes only for her and her people to survive in solitude. With the promise that we will never hear from them ever again, you are faced with a very heavy choice. Do you officially wipe out this long-thought dead race, or do you give them another chance at life? Admittedly, the consequences of your actions here are somewhat minuscule and really don't matter until later in the series, and even then, not really. However, with only the context I provided in just this super condensed video alone, you can probably see the ethical quandary. Mass Effect adds one final layer onto all of this. When embarking on a mission, you are given the ability to choose two members of your team to accompany you on said mission. What's fun about choosing these individuals isn't all that much to do with their capabilities in the field, but instead here, in these moments. Every member of the Normandy crew has a past, a personality, and a moral alignment. So in these moments of decisions, they will often act as the devil and angels on your shoulders, providing additional context and perspectives. To use the Rachni Queen as an example, if you bring Rex along with you, he will serve as the voice of the Krogan, whose story up to this point is so intimately tied to the Rachni. Naturally, he will encourage you to finish the story and ensure his people's suffering wasn't off the back of a hollow victory. Whoever else you bring along with you will likely act as the secondary voice of empathy, suggesting you set the Queen free. This final layer added onto the choices in Mass Effect is far more impactful than you may initially realize. Not only does it actively change the voices of those surrounding you, but it now provides even more context, consequences, and another layer of choice. It provides context by having these characters with rich stories bringing an additional perspective to the table. A character without that context will not be able to provide any additional layers to the conversation. This missing out on content is one consequence, but the other is sometimes who you do bring to any given quest rather than just those that you don't. Bringing Rex on one specific mission, for example, guarantees that Rex will murder the guy regardless of your choices due to that guy being Rex's bounty. Not bringing Rex opens up the possibility of showing mercy and allowing that character to live, which will be a fortune or consequence in a game further down the line. With all of this new information, this means that every mission, no matter how small, has a choice and consequence based on who you bring along in your party. Every mission, before engaging, should have a moment of careful consideration. Who would likely have some additional context on this mission? Who here has actual stakes in the mission's outcome? What's amazing about this chaotically arranged section is that it only reinforces my point when I make the claim that Mass Effect 1 is truly all about its characters. Because even when it's about the choices you make as Shepard, it's still just as equally about the characters Shepard surrounds themselves with. I claimed that most of the gameplay involved around gunplay and maneuvering has a negative domino effect, where each one fails right into the next one. However, just the same, everything outside of that and contained here in conversation, lore, and characters has an incredible positive domino effect, where each one complements the next in abundance, causing all of these systems to grab hold of players' attention, imagination, and curiosity. What if I had brought this companion instead? What if I had told this person no? What if? These pertinent questions aren't just ingenious. They are what keeps the average Mass Effect enjoyer coming back for more. Tying everything into itself through lore and gameplay ensures that the players won't just come to love the game, but the world that game takes place in and those who inhabit it.
Report to the ship as soon as possible. Bang, okay?
Speaking of loving this galaxy's inhabitants, Mass Effect performs an extremely impressive display of not only establishing its different galactic species, but also their established cultures. The Krogan were a warrior people who now have a defeatist philosophy, and you can feel it when interacting with them. Quarians have wandered through the galaxy, homeless, with their culture being heavily built and influenced by their original sin of creating the Geth. Seeing them away from their people is rare. The only ones you will see are young and inexperienced like Tali. The Asari are the Gerudo sex conquerors of the galaxy. Their entire culture is built around their long lives and ability to adaptively mate with anyone, regardless of race, species, or gender. Mass Effect's writing ties all of these cultures and themes with each of its characters, adding layers onto them as people without directly defining them. Rex opposes the nihilistic sentiment of his people. He's enough of a realist to understand that pulling his people together may be impossible, but part of him believes they should still try. Tali is young and naive, and while that adds a layer of charm to her, it helps establish that she is herself a person, defiant and steadfast, yet willing to embrace and learn. Liara is from the sex capital of the galaxy, born of a powerful member of that society, and yet Liara is more powerfully defined by her curiosity and book smarts. Any one character can be analyzed intimately, but perhaps nothing is more intimate than intimacy with these characters. There may be nothing more polarizing than attempting to express the very legitimate affection Mass Effect fans have for its characters. As I have expressed more than once throughout this video, it is the characters that make up the backbone of this franchise. Without them, it would not have stood the test of time. So when I tell you that Mass Effect has one additional way of interacting with these characters, you better believe it is one of the most beloved and well-documented mechanics of the series. However, I don't think even BioWare could have predicted this mechanic would take on a life of its own, possibly becoming more iconic than anything else in the franchise. If you have ever indulged in a sci-fi series, you may know how strangely impossible it is to encounter one without a heavy coating of romance. I'm not sure who's to blame for starting the trend, but where there have been spaceships with crews, alongside them reside romantic tensions between those crew members. When an alien species walks on screen, someone, somewhere, has experienced a strange sexual awakening. Not only do I not fully understand this phenomenon, I don't want to explore it whatsoever. In relation to Mass Effect, however, BioWare has perfectly successfully captured the sexual thrill of both of these aspects. The members of the Normandy crew are both alien and romanceable. At first, one might scoff at the notion of desiring to get to know these virtual creatures. However, it's impossible to deny the pull that these characters have on oneself. They're written with care and voice acted with impeccable direction, resulting in characters that feel so real. Not every member of the Normandy bunch is up for a little flirting. Not like they are written to be opposed to the thought, I just mean that there literally is no option for it. The fact that I cannot kiss and marry Rex is depressing, but far more disappointing for most is the lack of a Tali or Garrus romance. This bizarre lack of intimacy between characters is only incredibly odd when you recognize just how heavy-handed flirtation options are written into this game. It is not only possible to be a cartoonishly horny commander hopping from planet, species, and individuals with one goal, it's sometimes difficult to avoid. Shepard, dripping in Riz, is presented with many options across many characters throughout the series, each written in a way that I'm sure is gratifying for plenty of lonely gamers. However, from the removed outset, they are each their own categorical level of cringe. Okay, now take everything I said and throw most of it out the airlock. Mass Effect is unquestionably well known for its romantic partners. However, in this game, they are almost non-existent. Most of the previous paragraphs were actually some really nice groundwork so that I won't have to go over this same subject in future Mass Effect titles. Here in this first entry, however, you only have three options: Kaidan, Ashley, and Liara. With no same-sex romance options in the game without mods, these already limiting options are even more limiting. Thankfully, we always have the guarantee that Liara exists, who, as an Asari, breaks the same gender rule, seeing as her people can mate with anyone. Ironically, this mate with anyone anatomy carries over into how Liara is presented specifically in terms of sexual approach, making her honestly laughably simple to romance. I'm made almost uncomfortable by how quickly the relationship with her advances. Maybe that's her obsession with Prothean data attaching to you, due to Shepard's interaction with the beacon giving them a unique message of doom, or maybe it's just lazy writing. Each of these relationships, however, are effortlessly advanced through simple positive interactions that can land you in a very short, intimate scene in the final moments of the game. And while I take no issue with this notion, someone somewhere bumbled their way into an Azure sex scene and told Fox News, resulting in a mild controversy over the subject. While somewhat hilarious now, what with the quote-unquote news outlet labeling it as containing quote-unquote full nudity and graphic sex, it did end up causing a ripple in the fabric of game development that we will unfortunately have to save for the next game. For now, my comment on romantic inclusion is this: meh. Mass Effect did not personally present me with enough to really come to care for these specific individuals in question. It seems to me there is no coincidence that I found the romantic options disappointing, considering all three of these characters are at the bottom of my previously presented list. In the context of playing this game now, with the rest of the series in clear view, it cannot go unobserved that I may be incredibly influenced in a way that players in 2007 couldn't have possibly have been. I know that Mass Effect 2 and 3 loom on the horizon. I've seen images of Miranda's butt covering the screen like the moon during an eclipse.
I can't hide it.
I know what this series has in store for me, and I refuse to settle for the options in front of me simply because they are the only options in front of me. Take notes, children, because even if I didn't know what lay ahead in terms of characters and potential romance options, I still wouldn't settle for the bottom of the barrel. Shepard is better than that. I've spent far too long on this romance side tangent anyways, so let's check back in on the plot. We should be nearing the end here. During the closing moments of the game, Mass Effect does an honestly incredible job of beginning to wrap things up. After many hours in a tedious game of slow pursuit of a rogue Spectre, the plot plays its best card, and so now, I will lay those cards out for everyone here. Mass Effect enthusiasts will have recognized that I have somehow gone well over 10,000 words, while never once uttering the one word that matters. This isn't without explicit reason. It is my belief that in the year 2007, this word must have been so incredibly impactful. When uttered, I can imagine it caused players to shudder at the inescapable magnitude of the implications that coincide with it. I have displayed such conscious restraint for 2 reasons. Firstly, I believe that every game, movie, etc. has the potential to be discussed without spoilers ever having to come into play. In fact, I think it is a direct sign of intelligence and passion when one can accurately describe a work's impact without robbing someone else of that impact. I can, and happily will, sit here and over the course of this channel's existence, describe to you games in a way that hopefully does not serve as replacement for these experiences, but instead as encouragement. I want to tell you about a game and how truly incredible that experience is. I want to wax poetics about the emotional musings that these stories provide me, but nothing is more pleasurable to me than telling someone they really need to go watch a movie, an anime, or play a game, and never once uttering the twist. It is, to me, so satisfying to essentially trick someone into getting into something without ever robbing them of their own unique perspective. I do not ever wish to force my perspective of a particular game as the perspective. I believe what makes art so beautiful is what we as individuals bring to the table, getting something unique out of it rather than it being as monotonous as a historical account of facts. For this reason, I try very desperately to avoid talking about the spoiler when talking about anything. That last nugget of a surprise will be all the more surprising when you experience it, because I will have already talked to you about the game for an exhaustive amount of time without ever uttering that surprise. To me, that is the sign of a really good spoiler. One that is so deep in a sea of interesting topics to discuss that you almost never need to discuss it. For this reason, I will urge those few of you who have been convinced to give Mass Effect a try when you previously hadn't, to go do so now. This is the spoiler. One so monumental that discussions surrounding the game have been unable to avoid it ever since its reveal. I find this aspect almost depressing. The fact that I have been able to squeeze so much discussion out of a game that I insist upon you I do not even like without ever talking about the spoiler. It says something, though what that says I'm not too sure. Despite this, going forward, I will not only lay out said spoiler, but will also perform a condensed version of nearly the entire plot for the sake of those who wish to join our voyage without any prior experience. The second reason I have avoided using that word is that honestly, I wanted to prove a point. Doing so was effortless. I never once needed to steer the conversation in a different direction or purposefully distract and deceive you. The game does not reveal its twist the same way as I have. It is mentioned a few times in the first several hours. I think the game's plot could have been improved had the writing team shown this same level of restraint. That being said, in the hindsight of our current position, I do find it truly moving that even without this careful tiptoeing around the spoiler, Mass Effect still manages to land its narrative punchline with such effective impact. The final nail in our coffin is an in-game fact that ended up overshadowing a lot of the discussion surrounding this game, and for very good reason. It's kind of the coolest. However, I think that it's so cool that some people want to immediately jump into its discussion. And worse yet, it's so cool that the spoiler I am about to discuss is a setup for the direction of the rest of the franchise. In retrospect, I do not think that the result of that setup could have ever lived up to this moment, and this is why I believe it would be a disservice for me to not make mention of it in this video at all. If I fail to lay the foundation of what will eventually become the main driving force of this series' plot, then I will fail to set up many things, including my next entries discussing the series and eventually why this setup will one day lead to my and plenty of other players' severe disappointment. As unfortunate as that disappointment is, that is a discussion for the future. Here in the present, let us revel in the presence of a Reaper. Towards the beginning of the game, when we met our girl Tali, she presented evidence against Saren. In that recording of Saren, he is speaking to an individual known as Matriarch Benezia, Liara's mother. Benezia pops off with the statement that the two are one step closer to the return of the Reapers. This sparks the short discussion of what is a Reaper. According to the Geth memory core, they are a machine race that existed 50,000 years ago. According to this account of history, the Reapers are why the Prothean race suddenly vanished from existence, leaving behind countless pieces of evidence of their existence conversations, but very little outside of that. This conversation also sets up our MacGuffin, the conduit, something that, while unknown at the time, can't be any good considering Saren is fawning over it. We confront Benezia, who reveals many things. Saren is controlling her, and being within the presence of his flagship, Sovereign, the one we saw on Eden Prime, causes you to lose your mind and submit to Saren's will. She reveals the next step in our journey, loses herself to the voices.
Mother, don't leave. Fight him.
You've always made me proud, Liara.
Die. Then perishes by our hand. Next, our journey takes us to Vermeer, where Saren has somehow created mindless puppets of Krogan, cured of the genophage. Rex nearly kills us for insisting we need to destroy the base and the Krogan puppets, but thankfully, the situation can be defused.
I don't think so, friend.
Alternatively, Ashley can ensure her demise by my hands. It is here on Vermeer where the plot truly begins to take off. This is where we have our difficult confrontation with Rex, have a disappointing boss fight with Saren on a hoverboard for some reason. And joyously leave our choice of Caden, or in my case, Ashley, behind to blow themselves up with a nuke. Again, good riddance.
Dive, Chief.
Aye, Commander.
In between these big moments, however, Mass Effect manages to cram one even bigger layer in. In the heart of Saren's base on Vermeer, Shepard and team approach a digital representation of Saren's flagship. The twist begins when, in a booming, intimidatingly emotionless voice, it speaks to us.
You are not Saren. Rudimentary creatures of blood and flesh. You touch my mind, fumbling in ignorance, incapable of understanding. There is a realm of existence so far beyond your own, you cannot even imagine it. I am beyond your comprehension. I am sovereign.
Saren's ship is no ship at all. It is itself a Reaper, and it begins to put many things into perspective, a perspective so beyond our comprehension. The Reapers do exist, and worse yet, as their name implies, their goal is complete annihilation.
Organic life is nothing but a genetic mutation, an accident. Your lives are measured in years and decades. You wither and die. We are eternal. The pinnacle of evolution and existence. Before us, you are nothing. Your extinction is inevitable. We are the end of everything.
If you exist as an organic being with sentience, you must perish, not decreed by some level of personal vendetta or hatred, but because that is just how it is meant to be. The Reapers exist only to exterminate. We exist only to be exterminated.
The pattern has repeated itself more times than you can fathom. Organic civilizations rise, evolve, advance, and at the apex of their glory, they are extinguished.
In this brief discussion, potentially less than 5 minutes, so much is established. The metaphorical WrestleMania sign has been hoisted. The rest of the series will continue to point in its direction, reminding you what this is all leading up to.
You exist because we allow it, and you will end because we demand it. We are Legion. The time of our return is coming. Our numbers will darken the sky of every world. You cannot escape. Your doom.
The Reapers are coming. They are the end of everything. I adore the way Sovereign so callously ends the call, because having a discussion with a singular grain of rice in a sea of infinite dinners is so below meaningful to it.
Your words are as empty as your future. I am the vanguard of your destruction. This exchange is over.
With the call disconnected, we jump into that disappointing boss fight, nuke Ashley, and head for Ilos, a planet belonging to the Protheans. With Saren's power growing and himself inching closer to the MacGuffin finish line, we give chase, interrupted only by another voice from beyond our understanding. This time, it is Vigil, a Prothean virtual intelligence that informs us here, at the last second, what our objective truly is. Sovereign let slip that the mass relays in Citadel exist because the Reapers put them there, and wanted organics to advance their technology around them. Vigil reveals one step further. The mass relays are the Reapers' ease of access to galactic harvesting, but their immediate back door is the Citadel. Hook that thing up to the dark space where the Reapers are lying dormant, and all of life begins its end from there. That's how it happened for the Protheans. That's how it happened for those who came 50,000 years before them, and every 50,000 years before that. What Vigil reveals, piecing together Shepard's vision from the beacon on Eden Prime, however, provides one last piece of hope. It's past time for some reaping, and the Reapers were, for some reason, unable to arrive. Turns out, in their dying moments, the Protheans had found a way to sabotage the Citadel. Shutting off access to dark space has slowed the Reapers and bought everyone in this cycle time, but time is running low. The Reapers are still coming, just really slowly. Saren's involvement in all of this is to get to what we discussed earlier, the Conduit. The Conduit is just a stupid name for a back door into the Citadel. Saren is gonna slip in, take over the Citadel, and open it up for the Reaper invasion to start. But why? Saren is a little confused. He's pretty convinced that if he does this, he's gonna get something shiny at the end. But truthfully, it's just Sovereign's influence. When a Reaper or Reaper-adjacent item is around, indoctrination occurs. Within this indoctrination, we're shown that people are still mostly themselves, but they're super convinced that Reapers have their best interests in mind, and betraying a friend or the entire galaxy is worth their love and affection. Back when Benezia claimed that Saren's voice was in her mind, this must not have been the case. It was Sovereign's. Shepard launches the Mako into the Conduit, hyper-launching it into the Citadel in an incredibly daring move, and tears through the Citadel, blasting Geth away while making it to Saren residing in the now evacuated council room. Here it's actually possible, and relatively easy in the Legendary Edition, to convince Saren that he's indoctrinated. Doing so will lead to his self-game end, skipping an entire boss fight.
You should kill yourself now!
However, it's not over. Sovereign's taken matters into its own, robot tentacles? Sovereign hooks up to the Citadel amidst a chaotic space battle and takes control of Saren's body. The final boss fight, which can be a cakewalk or frustrating depending on many factors, occurs here in a small garden area just under the council room. After defeating Saren's reanimated corpse, Sovereign's actual Reaper body has a moment of vulnerability. Shepard gives the command that all available forces fire on Sovereign, and even with all of the might provided by the Alliance and the multitudes of Citadel security ships, the Council races only barely managed to destroy Sovereign. It took everything they had to take out one Reaper. Imagine if Saren had succeeded in his attempt. There wouldn't have even been a fight. In the wrap-up of the game, Shepard elects either Udina, trained political asshole, as the human representative to join/lead the council, or Keith David, aka Anderson. Either way, Shepard looks off into the distance, knowing that the Reaper threat is, in fact, on its way. With all of organic life threatened by this looming death, Shepard vows to do the impossible and put an end to the Reapers. Also, there's some DLC. Mass Effect 1 only had 2 DLCs. The first is a nothing, nobody, don't care shooting range. The second is titled Bring Down the Sky. In this one, a mobile asteroid station is hijacked by pirates and set on a collision course with the human colony Terra Nova. Our culprits aren't just any pirates though. Batarians. Batarians are a race outside of the Council, not willing and not eligible to join on account of the fact that they love slavery, piracy, and laser blasting swear words into planets. This is something incredibly confusing if you haven't read a lick of the Codex, because when the door opens and Shepard says, Batarians, you are made to feel a very particular way, like you want me to know these guys suck. Unfortunately, I'm too dense and far removed from the Mass Effect meme culture, so I completely failed to understand that the line Batarians, delivered with such vile intent, is supposed to be my cue to go full racist. I'm mentioning all of this because honestly, nothing else in this mission matters. The DLC's existence is to set up the fact that Batarians are the worst and will be the worst for the entirety of the series. It's important you know this and really get it in your head that the game sees them as irredeemable scum, every one of them. It's important you get this information now because I sure didn't. I never formed this hatred or even mild dislike for an entire entire space race. I just didn't like this group of terrorists hijacking an asteroid and threatening thousands of innocent lives. So when it was time for me to confront the guy in charge, I did what it took to get the hostages out safe, which meant letting the leader of this terrorist group live. Please put a huge pin in this Batarian discussion. It might be important one day. And with that done, that's most of Mass Effect in the books. There are some side missions I skipped over and a lot of details that I left on the cutting room floor, but as I said before, it's important to me that I don't provide replacements to games, just encouragement. In fact, the only reason I bothered with exploring the entire ending there is because yes, I do plan to cover the other games in this series, and it's important that I touch on some stuff so that I can say this. Mass Effect has certainly been one of the strangest experiences I've ever bumped into in my decades of playing video games. When transporting my brain back to the year 2007, I can completely get it. The implementation of the dialogue wheel, the Paragon and Renegade choices, the incredibly deep characters and lore provided in nearly every moment of this game do truly feel immense. In the world of video games, this game wasn't the biggest splash in a choice-driven adventure, but it did hit a note so pure that it was able to captivate audiences. Mass Effect managed to cast a net much wider than any previous BioWare game, and it's fairly evident how they did this. However, with the power of hindsight, the main problem I draw with Mass Effect is also what keeps me engaged. The game sets up the concept of immense possibilities, giving you plenty of choices and small alterations that could make for incredible depth upon replay. However, replays just highlight the issue I continue to take with this game. Overall, the gameplay is sluggish and unrefined. Choices can help spark life into the game, but the moments in between influential conversations are not moments that I find joy in reminiscing on. If anything, I find the most exciting part of Mass Effect is the part where my brain gets lost in the potential of where my choices may lead. I'm often lost in the wonder of how simple button presses in this game may have created engaging and unexpected consequences in the future. However, so little time spent in that wonderment is actual time spent enjoying the moment that I'm currently in. Perhaps this is the issue I take most with Mass Effect. I find myself most engaged with it when I am anticipating everything beyond it. Part of me wonders how much of this is modern day influence. How much of that focus on the future is a shared experience with the early players in 2007? Was Mass Effect made by its creators with direct intent to stand alone as a product, or is it truly meant to be held as the first step in an ambitious legacy? In my multiple playthroughs of Mass Effect, I find myself enjoying it less and less the more I play from beginning to end. I can't help but trudge through the experience and feel like, despite all of the changes, choices, and their consequences, this overall feels like a game that doesn't often offer much else to returning players. To put it into simple terms and to rush this discussion along, I'll put it like this. Mass Effect feels like a game full of creative concepts and ideas that are all implemented into a game that never pushes them to their fullest potential. Not out of incompetency or lack of effort, but because of the restraints formed by its own ambitious existence. Which is a good thing when we're talking about the first entry in a trilogy. However, I find this to be a poor excuse from a creator standpoint. Mass Effect should be able to stand on its own legs without the potential of its sequels looming over it in every sense. The Reaper threat looming over Shepard being almost metaphorical for this series and its incoming destruction. It will inevitably be poetic. What I can say when referencing comparisons between it and its sequels is this: there is no other game like Mass Effect. As we stretch into the future of this franchise and wave goodbye to the groundbreaking first entry in the series, I almost feel melancholic. Even when all future titles contain the name Mass Effect right there on the box, none will really feel like this game ever again. Mass Effect 1 is special in a way that no words can fully describe. It both feels older than its time while also being so innovative and creative. It manages to implement KOTOR abilities into a cover shooter in a way that takes some getting used to, but eventually feels natural. Mass Effect crafted a world that manages to go so far beyond itself with interesting races, stories, and characters, then gave us control of a character that strikes that happy balance between the creative control of both the writing staff and the player. Where the game fails to focus on a specific vision or identity, it still manages to capture the attention and imagination of the masses. And in every way that the gunplay fails the player, the writing team manages to reel me right back in. In so many ways, I think Mass Effect is the representation of potential. And no matter how I try to look at it, this is the conclusion I return to. It's unfocused plenty of times, unrefined in so many areas. It's difficult to get into, but impossible to ignore. For all these reasons and more, I feel like my conclusion for Mass Effect will always remain the same. I don't like it, but I can't dismiss it. When the gameplay bores me, melting my brain slowly with monotony, a conversation with Rex causes that same mind to fire on all cylinders. How oddly unexpected is that? And that's why I can't deny this game. It's so unexpectedly impressive in all the wrong areas. And when I look back to when I bounced off this game several times, I can't blame myself, because even now, trying to get myself and friends to give this game another shot is difficult. The gameplay isn't all that engaging. Moving from one place to another is oddly unsatisfactory, and then in between movement and gunshots are dialogue sessions that can last entire hours, hopping from one conversation to the next. I almost feel like in the modern outlook, Mass Effect doesn't have a strong hook for someone going in completely blind. I think the best incentive nowadays to play Mass Effect is the knowledge that you'll be playing the first entry in a trilogy that captivated gaming audiences for almost 2 decades. When I attempt to replay the series, the first game is a bar of entry I have to grit my teeth and force myself to bear. I like a lot of things about Mass Effect 1, but truthfully, I think I'm more in love with the broad idea of Mass Effect. I enjoy reflecting on the bigger moments. I feel good when I reminisce on the companions and side characters. I'm filled with an overwhelming sense of excitement when I think about Sovereign's monologue. Hearing Vigil's theme fills me with a sense of wonderment, like it's the first time all over again. But picking up the controller and playing it again was hard. I can't explain why people like Mass Effect 1, because I don't. My final feeling is this. The best part of completing Mass Effect, and subsequently this video, is the knowledge that what comes next is something I love. But if we're being fair, you don't get Empire Strikes Back without A New Hope. You don't get Assassin's Creed 2 without Altair's First Journey. And we'd never get an incredible, captivating yet flawed sequel without this first foray into the possibilities of Mass Effect's universe. So, with that, let's talk about why I love Mass Effect 2. Before you go anywhere, I just want to remind you that if you want to see more videos like this, to hit the subscribe button. If you enjoyed it, give it a like as well. If you really want to help out the channel, I have plenty of other videos, all of them much shorter than this one. Go check out a couple of those. Apparently that really helps with the whole algorithm and everything. But if you really want to show your support and get something for it, over on the Patreon, for only $1 a month, you get access to a lot of extra bonus content, including Rambling Rabbit, a monthly 20-minute show where I basically just turn on the microphone and talk about whatever I'm feeling at the time. This month's Rambling Rabbit, I'll be discussing the process of this video, as well as some things that I wish I had discussed and some stuff that I'll probably discuss in the future. But most importantly, I stayed up very late, woke up very early just to get this video done because, ladies and gentlemen, we are heading towards October. If you know me, you know I care a lot about October, and I got a lot planned. I got a lot of big ideas, got some surprises for you. I hope you're gonna love it, but I really don't have time to continue doing much else. I need to go get started on all of that, so I'm gonna leave it here. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you down the road. Be excellent to each other.